I'm going to give you the big idea of creation science. You can find answers to creation science questions at creation.com or at Answers in Genesis. I recommend the book Creation to Babel by Ken Ham, which covers the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Ken Ham talks about the biblical versus the secular account of origins. God created the world, animals reproduce after their kind, and the geology of the earth was formed largely through a global flood. There are two types of science: operational science and historical science. Operational science involves hypothesis and testing. It is observable, testable, and repeatable. Whereas historical science, which applies to creation and evolution, is not. It requires looking at evidence in the present and making educated guesses about the past. The earth is young, about 6,000 years old, according to the Bible. We can calculate the approximate age of the earth based on the genealogy of the Bible from Adam to Jesus. And we get thousands of years, not millions or billions. Fossils are not labeled. They don't tell you how old they are. There's plenty of water to cover the whole earth. If the earth were smoothed out, water would cover the earth to a depth of 1.7 miles. The waters were standing above the mountains. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down. And this is why we find shells and fossils of fish at the tops of the world's tallest mountains. All over the earth, we find billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. Sedimentary layers can form very rapidly, like they did when Mount St. Helens erupted, and laid down up to 600 feet of sedimentary layers in just 3 days. This created massive mud flows, which carved out a canyon, 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon. And there are Grand Canyons all over the world, not just in Arizona, but from Tibet to Peru to Mexico to Africa. Polystrate fossils show trees that were laid down vertically with sedimentary layers, making the evolutionary dating of these layers laughable. Wouldn't it be fair to say that the bottom of this tree is not 190 million years older than the top of the tree? Mount St. Helens proves how inaccurate radiometric dating methods are. They tested rock from the blast and got ages from the rock from 350,000 years to 2.8 million years old on rock that we know was only 10 years old. Dead fish float. They don't sink to the bottom and get fossilized over millions of years. No, they float, they get eaten by other fish, and the bones get scattered. On the other hand, fossilization happens rapidly. Here's a fish fossilized in the middle of eating lunch. Excuse me. Here's a school of fish that was just swimming around, and an ichthyosaur that was fossilized while giving birth. Here's a fossilized hat, teddy bear, and a flour sack. God created the world in 6 literal days, and he was very explicit about that. In Genesis 1, each day is described saying there was evening and morning. There was evening and morning the first day, evening and morning the second day, the third day, etc. The word for day is the word yom, which always refers to a literal day when the days are numbered, first day, second day, etc., especially when the days are described to have an evening and a morning attached. In Exodus chapter 20, in the Sabbath command, God says that we should work for 6 days and rest for one because he created the world in 6 days and rested for one. Evolution requires millions of years of death, disease, and suffering. But God's creation didn't include any of that. And that's why he said it was very good. Every year, the seas are getting saltier and saltier. There isn't enough salt in the seas for the world to be millions of years old. We've found red blood cells in T-Rex bones. Evolutionists say these bones are 65 million years old, but they could only be around 5,000 years old because red blood cells can't last that long. Check out these red blood cells from the T-Rex bones. There's no such thing as prehistoric. All animals, including dinosaurs, were created during the 6 days of creation. Flying creatures on day 5, sea creatures also on day 5. Dinosaurs did not evolve into birds. Birds were created before dinosaurs. Dinosaur scales are folds of skin versus feathers, which are from a follicle. Dinosaur lungs and bird lungs are extremely different. There was no death before sin, but what about insects? Not a problem. They died. People and animals have nephesh life, and insects do not. So there was no nephesh death before sin, but insects and plants did die before sin. Man was made in God's image and has all kinds of abilities that animals do not. Humans have a conscience. We know right from wrong, more evidence of the Creator. God made 2 genders, male and females. James Dobson says that biologically, male and female are different in every cell of their body. What about overpopulation? Not a problem. We could produce enough food to feed all the people on earth and more. Genesis 1 and 2 both speak of creation. In Genesis 1, we have the creation of the world and a brief description of God creating man. And then in Genesis 2, God expands and gives us more details as to how he created man.